like and subscribe. Now, what is a supernatural event that happened in your life that just cannot be explained? I don't know if I'd call it supernatural, but it was freaky and I still don't understand. I was in the kitchen cleaning up waiting for my kid's bus. I saw it pull up and saw him get off. He didn't come in, but he'd started playing around with hiding under the window to jump out at me and say boo. So I thought that's what he was doing, but I walked out and he wasn't there. I called his name and looked around the house thinking he was hiding from me, but I couldn't find him. I circled the house calling for him and the parent panic set in. It probably only lasted 90 seconds, but it felt a lot longer. Then his bus pulled up and he got off. I had a phase in my mid-teens when I would read the obituaries in the local newspaper. I saw a name that was familiar as it was the same as a family friend. It had his full first, middle, and last names. I didn't say anything to my parents since I figured they already knew. A few days later my mom told me he died and I said I knew since I saw his obit. She said, he died last night in his sleep. I went back through the newspapers. My mom kept them for a week before throwing them out, but the obit wasn't there. When the real obit came out it had his first and last name, but just his middle initial. This was almost 40 years ago, and I still think about it. Woke up to a weird feeling and saw an opaque silhouette of a little boy standing on the other side of the apartment facing me. I turned on my light and it was gone. When I turned my light off I saw it again, flipped the light back on, and went over there to make sure there was nothing that could be causing a weird shadow, etc. There was nothing there that could have created that specific shape, and it was standing in the pathway between my couch and wall, so it couldn't have been a shadow. I turned my light off again, and it was there, flipped it back on, and slept with the light on for the rest of the night. Couldn't sleep without the light on for days lol. I was biking down a country road I used to live on. I think I was 8 or 9. And on my way home I saw this small humanoid looking being run across the road from one crop field into a cornfield. The only details I could make out, and I still vividly remember, was that it was completely covered in yellow from neck to feet, and I think it has green on its head. I told my mom about it and all she could come up with was something about Cabbage Patch Kids. Never saw that thing again, but I still think about it from time to time. Mom, what was that? IDK. Probably a Teletubby or some Early into my now wife and I's relationship I had a dream about her in childbirth. Very vivid and long. Like I spent days in the hospital with her and everything was in a strange twilight. When it came time to deliver things went very wrong and she and baby ended up passing away. I woke up quite shook naturally, but brushed it off. I'm a nurse and have had to deal with traumatic situations before, and I chalked it up to me dealing with that stress through a dream. 6 years later, and my wife is pregnant. I have forgotten the dream by now. I get a call late into the 3rd trimester while I'm on shift. Wife is going to the ER for a bad BP. I get off my shift and go to meet her. As soon as I step into the room I remember my dream. It's the same damn room, which is extra spooky because the hospital we were at wasn't even built when I had the dream. This is last year right when lockdown started. My wife is admitted they want to wait a week to deliver if possible. She will be kept in a twilight state until that time. So it's me in this room eerily isolated as the world around us is frozen, and my wife is incoherent mere feet away. Lingering for days in this room I brushed off my dream, trying to manage my anxiety and stress. Come showtime my wife gets ready to begin pushing, and it's exactly the same scenario as my dream. Things start going poorly, but the drive thinks delivery is still possible, but at this point I finally freak out into full panic and demand a C-section for my wife. The drive, I can tell, wants to argue, but I think my outburst made her step back and reassess the situation, and she made the call for emergency C-section. Took 10 minutes for me to get taken back, and as I'm in the or I see my baby come out lifeless. They do everything they can and manage to resuscitate her. In the meantime my wife is doing poorly and they are scrambling to control her bleeding. I follow the baby out knowing there's really nothing I can do. Baby gets life flighted to another hospital. But before we go I see my wife stable and headed to the ICU. Both my wife and baby are critical but alive. Today they are both thriving. and my baby is 16 months and just a tornado of energy. I don't know that they would be alive if not for that dream and it causing me to freak out and demand a change in plan. Many years ago, my parents had separated and my father was planning on taking a trip across the country to California. He was pretty excited about it. I talked to him the day before he's leaving, wish him well, and tell him I'll talk to him after he gets to California. The day of his trip, he calls me and tells me he decided last minute not to go, refuses to really get into why, just says he changed his mind. Seemed really odd for something that he had been planning for a couple months. That night I'm sitting at my girlfriend's house and we are watching the news, and they report that US Air Flight 1493, the flight my dad was supposed to be on, collided with another aircraft while landing in Los Angeles. About 25% of the people on the flight were killed. Hard to know how my dad would have made out because it really depended on where you were sitting, front versus back of the plane. It was several months before he finally told me that night, before he was supposed to leave, he had an extremely vivid dream that he died in a fiery plane crash. So vivid that it scared him out of flying that day. My dad is a Marine Corps Vietnam veteran who saw combat. I can only imagine how vivid the dream must have been to scare him out of getting on that plane that morning. My buddy and I were playing tennis one night at some courts by my house. Lights usually went out at 11, but for whatever reason that night they went off at a weird time, like 10:43. Whatever, that was weird. We collected our stuff and started walking to my car about 500 feet from the courts. My buddy's mom pulls up right as we're getting to my car and goes, "Where the hell have you been? I called your cell and some guy was just laughing. It didn't sound like you." It was then my buddy realized he didn't have his phone on him. He told his mom to call his cell again, and we could see it light up in the middle of the court we were playing on, by the net, but still definitely in between the single lines, not at all where we kept the rest of our stuff. He goes and gets it, and only has the one missed call from his mom, the one she just made. He asked if she called the right number and her call log showed 3 calls to his phone all that night. We can't explain why the cell was on the court, or what happened with the calls, or what happened with the lights. It was surreal. Super minor compared to many in this thread. Night before Thanksgiving 3 years ago, I was across the country at my parents', driving back to Thurs with my now wife from a friend's house. As we draw near, there is some type of bundle in the middle of the road. I stopped and pulled off to move it, and it turned out to be a barred owl that got clipped by a car. Long story short, I spent the rest of that night getting the owl into a puppy cage, gave it some food and water, and the next day dropped it off at a wildlife rescue center. I got home the next week, all the way across the country, New Jersey to Oregon. I stepped outside and there was a barred owl sitting on my fence watching me. It was gone by the time I got back, but now I know I'm straight with all owls. When the owls rise up, and you will be okay. Went with my brother to see an old family property my mother had inherited in a really rural area. We were just looking about. It hadn't been lived in for decades. A bit of wind, a bit of a rainy day, and both me and my brother were inspecting the house until we started hearing a weird rhythmic knock coming from around the building. Just a knock at regular intervals, much like a clock's sounds, but a lot louder. We stepped out to look around, but the noise started sounding like it was getting further away from us until it disappeared. We left shortly afterwards. A couple of days go by and I stopped by my mother's. I ask her if she has any pictures of the original owner of the house, which was her grandfather. So my great grandfather. She pulled it out. Guess what? The man had a wooden leg as a result of a war injury. Told my mother all about it, and it was like she was remembering him. She says that's exactly how it sounded when he walked on the porch. Weird AF. This didn't happen to me, but a very nice old man and his wife used to live a few streets over from us. Well, she got very sick and his son flew in to help watch and care for her. A few weeks later she moved to hospice and later died. The night she died, her husband and son drive home, and they were talking about what to do for the funeral, and the husband asked, "Do you think she'd want some person to attend?" And they both said they heard the dead mom/wife in the backseat say no thank you. Had her such a polite burn from a ghost. She must have really hated that person. I'm just picturing some old lady going, "How about Janice? No thank you." I have an idea of what may have happened. but I cannot definitively say how this happened. My father died in 2000 in my parents' house. I was over one night pretty late after my mother had gone to sleep. I swear I could feel my father's presence, as I was right in the spot where he had died. They believe he had a heart attack while laying on the couch, tried to get off the couch to call for help, but fell on the floor and died, though no one else was home when it happened. I was on the couch when this happened. Anyway, I thought to myself, this is stupid. People don't leave essences behind. I'm not feeling anything. So, I say out loud, if this is really you, Dad, knock a box of cereal off the shelf onto the floor. I wanted to pick something I didn't think could happen by accident. I went into the kitchen and watched the shelf with the cereal on it for a few minutes and nothing happened. Since it was almost midnight, I decided to sleep in my old bedroom. I woke up the next morning and went downstairs and a box of cereal was laying on the floor. I say to my mother, did you knock that cereal onto the floor? She said no, it was like that when she woke up. So, what the F, man. However, my mother had a cat. I'm guessing the cat did it, but I don't know for sure. If she'd gotten on the shelf, everything would have been knocked around and messy from her. Everything else was in its normal position. Just the box of cereal was on the floor. I mean, regardless, it has to have been the cat, right? Your mom is a refine madlad. She just said no to a ghost and fayo. Once you've had enough of their it's pretty easy to tell a spirit no. Gotta mean it, or they won't listen. Seriously, you don't get more alpha than that. The night my friend took his own life I had a sudden urge to call him. I'm in Canada, and he was in Atlanta at the time. I didn't call, because I was out partying with friends, and got the news the next day. When I woke up, I feel like I missed the chance to save a friend, but my dad says it was him letting me know he was gone, but was going to be okay. I'm sorry I didn't reach out, but I regret it all the time. My mother died a day or two after my daughter's 5th birthday. I saw her in the day of the party, when I did, and I was finally able to have a seat. I sat next to her and something didn't feel right. She had become very bloated, and I told her. She said it was from her medicine, and she was given water pills that would help. I still didn't feel right, but I was so preoccupied with the party that I didn't delve deeper. She had a heart attack. I was usually the one to push her or bring her to doctor visits, and I very much so regret not trying to that day or the next. I love and miss you every day. I have quite a few actually, but one that happened pretty recently stands out. I grew up in a very rural area, mostly crop farms everywhere. About a mile from my parents' house, there was this old abandoned farmhouse that all the area kids said was haunted. They would sneak into the house after dark, all the typical stupid kid crap. But I believe there are things in this world better left alone, and never went. Years pass, the house fell into disrepair, and was eventually torn down, leaving an old weathered barn. Well, I make a little side money selling photos of abandoned places, so I wanted to take a picture of the barn. I parked on the road and was walking up the drive. I made it about 10 feet before I just could not walk any further. My feet wouldn't move forward. My adrenaline spiked and I burst into tears. So I turned back and ran to my car. I didn't feel safe until I got past a nearby creek you have to cross to get there. I let it go. But a few months later we had to drive past the property after having Christmas dinner with my parents, and there was a creature standing in the drive. It reminded me of the faun from Pan's Labyrinth. Just super tall with a white head and horns or antlers, but the eyes were more on the side of the head. Again adrenaline kicked in, and I burst into tears. But I was trying to keep it together because I didn't want to freak out my kids. My husband asked if I was okay. I just said, you saw that, right? Yep. Was it human? No. I refuse to drive that road ever again. Not me, but my mother. She tells two stories. One time her doctor changed her blood pressure meds. It caused her to pass out on the kitchen floor. She had a near-death experience that's similar to what a lot of people describe. The tunnel of light. Dead family members coming to see her. Incredible feeling of joy, etc. My uncle, her brother, was maybe 10 years older than her. Back in the 60s, he had a boat and used to take it from Florida to the Bahamas. It was a trip he had made many times. One day he left in the boat and vanished. A short time after, she was at work and her phone rang. It was a woman. Is this Carol? Yes, I just wanted you to know that your brother died an honorable death. Then the woman hung up. Holy sh, that last story is wild. Did you or your mom ever have any theories on what happened? No, they never found him, or the boat. Sometimes when she tells the story she mentions the Bermuda Triangle, but she says he was probably just robbed and murdered, and the boat stolen. The phone call makes me think it was someone they knew though. I was out with my parents, and it was late coming back home. At around 2:30 am we were at a traffic signal. A homeless guy comes and knocks on the window of the seat where my mother was sitting. As she rolled down the window to give him money, he said, "Check what is happening at your brother's house." He proceeded to take the money and walked away, probably thinking that he was a bit crazy in the head. We didn't bother and went home. Next morning mom gets a call from her brother's wife. He has had a heart attack at 2:30 am. Your mom was brave. I don't know if I'd have the guts to roll down the window at 2:30 am for someone. I would like to think I would, but that seems too much like a recipe for a midnight carjacking. My son, now 10, was 4 and was able to name my grandmother by name. By a picture of her when she was in her 20s that was in storage that my mom and I were going through. She died before my wife and I even met. He said she was the lady who taught him how to do his silly laugh. Context, his silly laugh as we called it was a laugh that sounded just like my grandmother's. The reason it was so specific and silly was that my grandmother had a brain aneurysm when my mom was in her teens. It paralyzed the left of her body, including vocal cords and lips, and gave her a very distinct and odd sounding laugh. I was in the same position as your son, except mine was a jerk and would yell at me for something. Can't remember now. I live in a city and my brother lives in another city that is around 1,000 kilometers away. He visits sometimes but not quite often. On an average of once every 2 years. On one day around 7 years ago I was sleeping on the couch in the living room at my apartment. I woke up suddenly on my brother sitting just beside me, and I was shocked/surprised, started greeting him and asking him about how is he doing and what pleasant surprise it was. Next thing I realize that this was a dream as the doorbell was ringing, which woke me. Went to open the door and guess what? It was my brother who came to surprise us. This literally had me speechless. Don't have any explanation, and I think sometimes you don't need to have one. When I was a kid, about 10, 12-ish, I was carrying a load of laundry upstairs home alone while mom was out doing errands. We have this weird carpet runner over our hardwood stairs that's only really attached at the top of the flight, but otherwise not fitted or secured to each individual stair. So naturally I step on an air bubble of carpet with my vision obscured by the laundry and fall backwards while bear hugging a bunch of blankets. I specifically remember thinking, "Welp, guess I'm about to die," while almost airborne with just my big toe left on the carpet, when I felt 2 hands, one on either side of my shoulder blades, give me a firm shove that launched me back up on the step and diagonally against the stair rail. I assumed mom somehow silently came back early without announcing herself and turned around to thank her while still clinging to the railing, but no one was there. I scurried upstairs to put my things down while calling her name and walked the house afterwards to check if any doors were unlocked or if her car was there. I finally resorted to calling her cell, where she told me she was hitting up a few more stores. It still feels like there's a presence on that stairwell, like someone's watching, but in a protective way rather than sinisterly. Thanks for all the awards. I'll have to holler to the stairway ghost and let it know the internet loves it. We had a stair ghost too when my mum was heavily pregnant. She used to sit in front of the fire in the den with the dogs at her feet. One night, both dogs jerked awake and proceeded to watch someone climb the spiral staircase, but nobody was there. She's pretty sure it was her mum. Checking that our bedroom, twins, yay, was ready for us coming because the dogs were calm, and she said she just felt this really reassuring presence. Fast forward 6-ish years, and I woke up one night to find my mum sitting at the end of my bed and basically running a soothing hand up and down my leg. Said to her the next day that it was really nice, or something along those lines. I was young, and she was absolutely terrified because she didn't come into our room. My mum is the spitting image of her mum, so I'm guessing it was my gran soothing me back to sleep. You better thank that stairwell ghost. I had a dream once about my high school best friend who had moved out of state and started a family. I hadn't seen her or spoken to her in at least 10 years and had never met her child, except seeing picture/posts on Facebook and commenting on them. In my dream I was walking down a street at night and out of nowhere her little girl appears next to me and I asked her, "Where is your mama? Why are you by yourself?" I remember her taking me to some bushes near a random house on the street and finding my friend in bad shape, beaten up or something, on the ground, and I remember running to the door of the random house screaming for help and to call the police. This is all I can recall from the dream, but I think there may have been a little more. The next day, I wake up and think to myself, man, that was weird. Maybe I dreamt of her because we had just spoken a little in comments of a Facebook post. I should send her a message. I go on about my day, go to work, get home later that day and sit on my couch and scroll through Facebook. Bam. 1000 posts, rest in peace. etc. All of them tagged my friend and her daughter. I thought, what in the actual F***ck? At that point there was no information as to what had happened, so I thought it must have been a car accident or something. Over the course of the next few weeks to months, more and more information came out, and it was not an accident. My friend and her sweet baby had been murdered by some animal. I won't refer to them as a person. This happened about 5 years ago. I still remember the main parts of the dream vividly. I still am a little horrified that I had this dream that night when it was happening possibly. I haven't been able to tell anyone else about it either, because just thinking about it gives me chills. I've had an experience just like this. Had a disturbing dream like that about someone who I hadn't talked to in months. Woke up in a panic at 3 AM. Without knowing why, I just went and stood in the kitchen, then started crying. Found out later that day they overdosed in their kitchen at 3 AM. Did they catch the murderer? Well, this is the worst one here. Very sad. I was home alone in high school. It looked like car headlights were shining through our kitchen door, which didn't make sense because it was next to a field. I looked out the kitchen door and the lights were coming from about 50 feet off the ground. It was a row of 3 white lights and 1 red light. I opened the door and there was complete silence and the whole field was lit up. I closed the door quickly, turned around and it was gone. Working as night security for a small office at a sanitation plant. Building was a single entrance, and you had to check in at the security station. To get in or out, a worker shows up and checks in saying he needs to take care of a few things and grab some stuff. So I check in his ID and flip a few lights for him, then go back about my business. Fast forward a few hours and my shift is about to end. I still haven't seen the guy come back. So I go patrol the building to find him, and literally can't find him anywhere. He's not in any of the areas I turned lights on for him. No other lights are on. And he's not in any other rooms. I stop by security to see if we just missed each other, and he's trying to leave, but nobody is there. I do a second patrol and still no signs. At this point I went to check cameras to see where he went, but he's not on a single camera, except the one covering the entrance and security station. He turns down a hallway and never shows up on the next camera down said hall. At this point I logged it as an incident and GTFO right as the relief shift showed up. Next day my boss calls me and says that worker had been on vacation out of state for several days and wouldn't return for several more. Nobody could offer any explanation to what happened. Imagine finally having a decent out of body experience and you end up at work instead of like some tropical beach. Poor man astral planed into work while on vacation. That's some job dedication there. This is the funniest explanation and would be a good movie plot. Did he return? Yeah. He came back from vacation right on time and was pretty spooked since the boss had called to check on him and told him what happened. Couldn't offer any explanation still, and neither could anyone else. This is the creepiest story on this thread. Did you stay at that job after this happened? I love stories like this. Thank you for sharing. As my great-grandfather passed away, my aunt and uncle had an unopened voicemail on their landline answering machine. As they listened to the voicemail, it sounded exactly like my great-grandpa saying "God help me" before it faded off. The thing that trips me out the most is how my aunt and uncle requested a log of their incoming/outgoing calls, and if there were no calls logged in that time frame, I heard the voicemail. So bananas.